Thank you for joining us again. It's really, really wonderful to see you. So Miia is director of Rainbow Mind, which is a London and Manchester-based LGBTQ plus service which champions mental health and emotional well-being for LGBTQ plus communities. Miia is Bamber Deputy Director, EDI Lead, and City and Hackney LGBTQ plus Special Interest Chair. Miia is a supervisor, trainer and practitioner in MBSR, MBCT and mindful self-compassion. Previously, Miia was a mindfulness and compassion-based methodology lead at City Hackney and Waltham Forest. Miia is involved in addiction recovery, acceptance and commitment therapy, compassion focus therapy, and lead designer and trainer for radical self-care. Miia will be discussing radical self-care later in the conversation. Mia's worked in other mental health contexts, a third sector, local authority context, social inclusion work, social inclusion policy, also within corporates in the City of London. They have a long-standing history and interest in social policy and international politics. And as you will have already gathered from that incredibly wonderful guided practice, Miia is interested in the intersections of our human identities. In the planning meeting with Andrew and myself, Miia said to us, intersectionality isn't something that just happens to other people. So Miia has kindly come back to speak for us to share their human experience regarding the richness of intersectional identities, how Rainbow Mind works, whereby not just one, but all parts of our identities are welcome, respected and cared for. So thank you once again, Miia. Is there anything else you'd like to add to that introduction, Miia?
That is very plentiful, nothing to add at all.
Wonderful, thank you very much, Miia. So we're grateful that you've offered to share with us some of your lived experience. And I just wonder if you could start the conversation with sharing from your perspective how life and society are from your perspective.
Yes. Yes, so there are quite a few sort of intersections in my lived experience that have informed how my life has been, mostly full of richness. I'd like to add, despite also challenges and trials and tribulations. For example, my sexual and gender identity are quite a lot to do with me being in London, because London was a place where I found others who also had some of these intersections, and others in the general population, perhaps, who met them with less hostility at times, at least, and some people at least, even some of the decades ago that I arrived. Where I came from, that wasn't quite the case, and I felt very much an odd one out. And I'm also neurodiverse, so there is something of spectrumy, Aspergery qualities in my makeup, and that also has meant that I've often felt a bit of someone with quite maybe difference that I couldn't quite understand even myself until I kind of have studied these things in my own experience and in the world. And I think obviously coming from those positions of those intersections of sexuality, gender identity, my gender identity as well is one where I've never felt that I am of the gender, biological gender that I was born. So even at the age of 3 or 4, I already always felt that neutrality. So I feel that I am a gender. So for example, in all my years of growing up and being in this world, I have never, for example, I never did read one single women's or teenage or girls magazines or anything of that kind. I was never drawn to that, nor did I want to transition from one gender binary to another. So there is that, again, a spectrum of human lived experience where not everyone actually experiences their identity, their way of being in the world, or their internal landscape as a binary. And I know that lots of people who do quite comfortably sit in binary still actually share with me and share in the world about the fact that how people are sometimes feeling some pressure to conform to how you should be in a binary also sits not very well with lots of people. So obviously there's that general issue there of expectations that often a burden at both ends of those binaries for people. But then there might be also something that's really strongly felt internal sense from very young age as well, where people realize their identity is somewhat different. So that's some of my lived experience, and obviously I at times have not been met with the same respect by whether it's family or society or contexts where I work or live, or even friendships, not quite met with the same recognition, and sometimes it's not very much. Also, there can be oftentimes not meant hostility or microaggressions, and so I do recognize that. But there's that sense where people somehow fear the otherness, and therefore they don't talk about lots of things, or they don't ask about your life, or they don't relate to you like they might to another. So there's sort of subtle forms of ways in which people can feel othered because others can't relate. And I kind of, in all those respects, would really like to see people bring their brave hearts to the quest of learning and reevaluating how they see difference in all the aspects of intersectionality, and kind of willingness to learn and willingness to open up and willingness to reevaluate, and therefore then perhaps be in the world in different ways in relation to difference. And I think because of that sense from an incredibly young age, I then have also myself often been engaged in supporting people with other differences, because, yeah, there's that famous saying that I can't quite remember, but it's like first they came for this group of people and I didn't speak out, and then they came for this and I didn't speak out, and then they came for this and I didn't speak out, and then when they came for me, there was no one left and to speak out for anyone. And and just the richness of humanness, is what sort of brings a song to my heart. And I love to celebrate the richness of intersectional differences and our richness of humanness. And that's sort of maybe just me in terms of, that's kind of something of me that I've just shared there. I haven't scripted this at all, and I told Teresa and Andrew I will not, because this feels like it just needs to be shared in a way that feels natural. And if it feels like I've shared only certain fractions and you're interested in any other aspects, or feel like I've left gaps, to ask. But in terms of how it's then informed my life and my working life, it always has. For example, I used to play tennis for Finland. Came through park courts, not some fancy private clubs because they didn't exist in my hometown. And but I was very single-minded as a spectrumy person as well. Whenever I decide I'm going to learn something, I tend to learn it very well. And I therefore got to represent the junior and the senior team. And that meant that when I arrived in the UK, and instead of just cleaning or babysitting or whatever, which were some of the things I first did, even though I had been to uni already in Finland, but I decided to go back to tennis because, one, it's been something that's been part of my life pretty much all my life, but and sports in general. But also, I immediately could walk into places where I would get paid, at the time, to me, handsome money, because of my level of level of playing experience and be part of teams and etc. But I somehow didn't feel like I wanted just that world. So even though I've worked in performance side at international professional level and supported and coached people, I ended up immediately going to work for sports development unit of an inner city borough, where I then wanted to actually do similar things that I experienced as a kid, which is park programs. So then kind of growing park programs and teams from anyone in society. So that's been a huge sort of way in which I always seem to orientate wherever I am quite naturally without it being that deliberate, which is to equalize and bring the opportunity to all. And similarly, whether it's been working as a coach in sport or working as a coach in mental coaching, whether it's then moving towards obviously what I've trained in and worked in now for more than a decade in terms of mindfulness-based, compassion-based approaches, I want to make them available to all. So that's a big driver. And in Rainbow Mind, we have a very foundational principle, which I was relearning and evaluating and being, in a sense, being introduced to by one of our Black therapists who was much more au fait on what all of this means and why we might work in these ways. And this in a kind of foundational principle immediately obviously chimes with some of how I've seen the world. And we all as a team, very, very diverse team of different backgrounds of LGBTQ plus folk, work from these principles of welcoming in our therapy sessions, in our mindfulness sessions, and in our meetings, and ways of approaching everything from that base of intersectionality, recognition, respect, and care for all parts. And like Teresa said it in the intro, I said to Teresa and Andrew that even though I can share of Rainbow Mind or sexuality and gender identity minorities, for example, and that intersection within Rainbow Mind of also Black minority ethnic LGBTQ folk, intersectionality obviously applies to every single human, all of us in this space today. And in a moment, I'll share a diagram that shows some of those aspects, and we can all reflect a little before we go to the breakouts on how that applies to us. How might that also then apply in our working lives? Because this is the workplace mindfulness community. In terms of Rainbow Mind, we have also developed a modality from mindfulness and compassion-based approaches called radical self-care. So we bring awareness side, the noticing side, and the care and compassion side. And we've built it from evidence-based modalities. We fused it into a program, which we then ran a randomized control trial with City University. That was funded from the Government Equalities Unit. And the results from that RCT showed that the intervention is clinically and statistically significant in reducing anxiety and depression, and also internalized shame and self-criticism and harsh perfectionism. And also it enhanced self-compassion. So we had about a good sort of set of almost 8 different measures that we used, very well-known measures in mental health and otherwise in these modalities. We are now scaling that approach. So we have a training group of 30 people who are being trained in the approach, and a group of trainers and assistant trainers, which is an additional 8 people. So in the world, hopefully, sometime in the spring next year, we'll have close to 40 practitioners able to take these approaches and this way of working forward. And our aim is to further expand this program. We are just working on a funding bid to try and get some funding to further expand it. nationally and internationally. So I don't know if there's anything else that anyone would like to know at this point. Or Teresa, did you have any questions for me or anything you'd like me to expand upon? Karen's also unmuted. Teresa, you are muted.
Yeah, I think my computer is there. The thing with being unscripted, Miia, is that you happen to answer all of my questions in what you just shared there, which was remarkable. And I just wanted to say thank you for sharing your experience and your perspective. I know we discussed that sometimes they're painful memories that are shared from minority communities, or from your experience with them. And what really resonated with me was you were not met with the same respect, and to the point where, you know, for me it's a real to really meet people where they are, whoever they are, wherever they are, and that's a real learning for me, and a sadness for me to hear that from your background as well. So thank you for sharing that. I think you were going to talk about, oh, Elizabeth, you've raised your hand. Do you want to ask Miia a question?
Well, I think Karen had her hand up before me.
Oh, sorry, Karen. I'm so sorry, I didn't see you. Do you want to go first, Karen?
Okay, I'll go first then. I just wonder, Miia, whether you could, from your perspective, say what you would say to someone who doesn't know so much about intersectionality like me, what it actually is, if you were to say it sort of in a really sort of plain, short definition.
I do have a document which has that intersectionality wheel and also has some definitions to offer, which I might kind of look at to offer you something more formal and put it in the chat. But from my perspective, just working with it and living it, it is about recognition that all humans come with a set of lots of different intersections of identity, and that some of those, for example, have not been met in society, in as respectful or caring manner, and there can be areas of overlapping discrimination and oppression that some people face, and that then that intersectional recognition will often can inform some of the work that we do in organizations, for example, to support, to protect, and to guide some of the policies, some of the practices. And I'll leave it there.
Yeah, great. That's very helpful. Thank you.
Elizabeth?
Yeah, I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
Yeah, thanks very much, Miia, for sharing, especially about your early life from the age of about 3 onwards, and some of these questions that you yourself were unable to answer satisfactorily. My question is with regard to what you mentioned as evaluation. You're talking about certain stages of, I suppose, levels of understanding, and that there would be a need for evaluation before moving forward. So am I understanding that to mean that the person who feels that they are non-binary or whatever the issue is, that they should seek an evaluation of themselves? That's one thing, but how do we get other people to also examine their own and do their own evaluations? In other words, the general public or the people with whom we come into contact, how do we get them to evaluate their own perhaps unconscious biases. And you mentioned quite rightly that none of this, very often the microaggressions that you faced aren't deliberate or spiteful or even intentional or personal. So what techniques have you used, or those that you can recommend, to encourage those who are othering you to do that bit of homework on themselves? I hope that's clear.
Yes, it is.
Thank you.
The latter part particularly was clear. In terms of the earlier part, I think that the same process applies to every individual, whether it is aspects of ourselves that we need to understand better or aspects of others. So that's all I would say. In terms of, it's almost like education comes first, then comes evaluating and re-evaluating. This is how perhaps I might have seen the world. Yet when someone points out to me that lots of mindfulness practices are guided in a very ableist way and aren't very accessible to people with different bodies, then I can take that on board and even research a bit and think hard at how might I guide a practice. And you might have noticed that I kept on referring quite often in the guiding of that first practice to whatever parts of your body are in contact with the support. So that there wasn't just the assumption everyone would have, for example, feet and legs and body quite exactly in the same posture. So that is a direct thing of re-evaluating and then relearning and acting or speaking or behaving differently as a consequence. So that's something that's been a journey, for example, for me as a trainer of new practitioners and in mindfulness. And same applies, I suppose, to any parts. For example, it can just be in a gender binary, that perhaps people are open and willing to learn and understand and be empathetic to somebody else's experience and then reevaluate what is, for example, sexist behavior. Someone might be willing to do that. Some people aren't willing. It might also be similar to gender identities that are in a spectrum. And then another example is like, obviously racial injustices were brought to all of our attention in a very, very painful way, because both Black and white people have trauma as a consequence of how the world has been set up for hundreds of years. And it's a very difficult thing to be with. And within all of that racial awakening, in the last year, for example, I've instigated in my workplaces things like Layla Saad's book, Me and White Supremacy. And we've gone through that process at Mind as staff group, willing to do the reflecting, because there are reflective questions at the end of each chapter. And also I initiated this same process for the British Association for Mindfulness-Based Approaches, BAMBA, the governing body of mindfulness, for the executive board. And we are going through it at the moment. So these are just ways to learn how our conditioning, we have racial conditioning, gender conditioning, in every aspect. We've been conditioned by our life experience, which means we have lots of blind spots and biases. And however much we'd like to feel that we are a good person, and therefore we are not some of those things that we fear, things like racist or sexist or homophobic or acting in heteronormative ways that might then be blind to other people's experience, however much it might be hard to recognize that we actually do often act unknowingly in ways that aren't necessarily easy for others. So it's the willingness to then educate and learn and have an open heart, because that's what life is about. It's a constant process of change, of opening and learning and stepping forward from more knowledge and maybe even more heartfulness. So thanks, Elizabeth, for your question.
Thank you, Elizabeth and Karen. I feel like Miia, now may be a good point to share your screen. So we wanted to talk about the journey of Rainbow Mind and radical self-care, and also the importance of intersectionality and applying it into the workplace. And I think, along with your sort of question, Karen, how do we, translate this from obviously Mia's incredible knowledge as lay people who don't know as much and want to learn and want to better ourselves. How can we apply it in our workplaces? So if you want to go ahead and share your screen and maybe talk us through your diagram.
Yes, I'll do that. But this also links to all of the intersectionality that I'm sharing. One of the definitions just now on equity. The term equity refers to fairness and justice and is distinguished from equality. Whereas equality means providing the same to all, equity means recognizing that we do not all start from the same place and must acknowledge and make adjustments to imbalances. The process is ongoing, requiring us to identify and overcome intentional and unintentional barriers arising from bias and systemic structures. So links to my last point about that willingness to recognize, learn, reevaluate, and that links to all of us together with others and within our own lives. And yes, so in terms of then the other part, let me get that.
And I guess it just in a way that's about learning new pathways, neural pathways as well. It's unlearning our habits and relearning new habits. But for me, habit, it could be like a lifetime or years of habits or months of habits, but a habit could be something we've done one day and then we change it the next day with that new learning. It's like something I did yesterday, or that, that didn't go so well. So the new learning has happened already. The reevaluation has happened already. And that happens very, very quickly in our brain. And the new neural pathway into that unlearning is very important.
So, can you see that?
I can. Can everybody else see that okay? Yeah, great.
Okay. So, yeah, maybe just to have a moment to take a look and relate this to your own experience. These aspects of you, your life, are there parts that have gained prominence and other parts that you'd rather keep away from certain situations or people, or you'd rather not people didn't know about or didn't ask about, didn't notice? And also noticing that that can be quite painful, an experience, but perhaps with that mindful awareness and compassion and care towards ourselves, how would it be to actually welcome some of these to be met with gentleness and kindness, supportiveness? And how does this also relate to workplaces? How somebody comes to certain contexts at work, and there might be aspects of their identity that mean that they've internalized, for example, a lot of shame or sense of stigma that they find hard, and banter or avoidance from others, for example, might be very painful, on the non-recognition of aspects of themselves, or maybe they'd rather hide them because they're protecting themselves. So just an invitation to take that all in. And I think, Teresa, we thought that we would have now some breakout rooms.
Yes, and we I think, Luke, if you're able to do that, maybe just 2 breakout rooms, if that's okay with everybody. And the question we wanted to leave you with is, if I can find it now. How can you bring the experience of rainbow mind and intersectionality into your workplace community or workplace training? So from that, how can you use the intersectionality diagram that Miia has shared to help or to support in the workplace or your training? One thing just of interest, Miia, before we go into breakout rooms, if you don't mind a question, is, you know, those sections that we do want to avoid sharing with other people, that we perhaps are ashamed of, or that we're protecting ourselves. Protecting ourselves or avoidance behavior. And I guess that's, I'm not quite sure what my question is. Is it like, we don't, obviously not everybody wants to share those, so we can meet them with compassion and we can meet them with care, but we might not want to share them with everybody, especially in the workplace.
Absolutely, and that's where the most compassionate act might be to not disclose. Yeah, the most caring aspect towards ourselves might be not to disclose or not to want to talk about, because also sometimes, especially, it might be the same for the gender binary, a sense of the kind of burden of trying to educate others, and or any parts of us where we feel, whether it's about nationality, language, class, whatever aspect of us, we feel that we'd rather not talk about because of the ignorance with which maybe we get met, and or denial from others. So of course, our nervous system is constantly opening and closing. And in some of the modalities we work with that mind, for example, compassion focused therapy, mindful self-compassion, we deliberately kind of emphasize that we can kind of join that natural process of opening and closing by making wise choices, compassionate choices, when it is okay to open, even to our inner experience. And I kind of tried to guide you at the earlier practice a bit more trauma sensitively and in a trauma-informed way, giving you choice to opt out. It's only invitational, doing what's best for you, so that people don't feel like they've been backed into a corner. Because especially with trauma, that can be, and anxiety, etc., can be quite triggering. And also, many of us don't like to be told what to do, so resistance comes up. So always kind of giving the choice to people can be very helpful. And therefore also, yes, opening and closing is something that we welcome in during practices and outside of practices in how we work. Good question, Teresa. Karen?
Yeah, could I make a suggestion? Because we are such a small group, I wonder whether we could stay in this group so that we can hear what we may want to share in response to that question. I don't know.
I think because Pen just left us as well, and I think Matt's just left us, so I think it probably makes sense to stay as a holistic body together. Is everybody happy with that, or would you prefer to go into smaller rooms? So if you just want to unmute yourself and just say, let me know what you're thinking. If everyone's happy to stay in this room, thumbs up. Okay. Carrie, you okay with that? Okay, wonderful. That sounds great. Yeah, so sorry, just to your point, Miia, it's around trust as well, and feeling that safety, and that safety and trust that you can share parts of yourself, and at work, it's around who do you trust to do that, and it's certain work cultures do not inspire people to share parts of themselves. But anyway, I'll stop talking now. As Andrew says, I'll stop talking now and hand it over to you to please sort of discuss this. Oh, was it? Matt's just looking at the chat now. Matt's got a Cub Scout group. Thank you to everybody. Okay, so how can you bring the experience of Rainbow Mind and intersectionality into your workplace, community or training? If I can hand over to you, and we'll just be in one big breakout room.
I think I found I've just left a large financial services institution. I used to work for Lloyds Banking Group, and I found there that there was a massive change in behaviour. Once we had a strapline which was just bring your whole self to work, and it was encouraging people just to be themselves, whatever that might be, to be open about it. And some of the stories that came out were heartbreaking. When you realise how people were hiding the truer selves at work because they felt they wouldn't fit in, that was really shocking to me. And I feel personally that I've got so much to learn. I always try to meet the person, but there is a fear, I think, of saying the wrong thing as well. There's definitely fear there. Even for me, I would never intentionally upset anybody, but there is a fear of, if I ask this question, am I going to upset someone, Miia? So that's something for me. I am genuinely curious, genuinely interested, genuinely want to understand. But yeah, it's quite a big thing. It's almost me being brave to ask the question, because the worst thing that happens is that you can say, don't really want to talk about that, or that's not appropriate, or whatever it might be. So yeah, just some thoughts.
Thank you, Mel, for sharing that. Yeah, and it is so common that that we don't want to upset, or in any way upset somebody, and fear that we might either upset, or that we look like a fool, or worse, for saying the wrong things. And one of the things around a lot of this is that I often talk in different situations organizationally about the fact that we will get things wrong, because we cannot, because we've not lived someone else's lived experience, we cannot know it all. And a part of the process of learning is to take some of those little steps to be brave and courageous, and also to just apologize. Like if someone refers to me, she, her, and then, for example, they say like a couple of colleagues in meetings, then they would, for example, say to me in chat or something, would you like me to sort of acknowledge that I got your pronouns wrong? When, for example, in that situation, people either do that, or it kind of sends a signal that it's okay to, maybe get things wrong. And, I will just say, that's okay, thanks for acknowledging. So someone did that recently in a big training group, and then they put it into open chat, said, I'm so sorry, I gendered you. And I just said, yeah, thanks for acknowledging. That's great. And that's it. And it's like that, if we do make a mistake, maybe instead of defending and avoiding defending ourselves, and just to apologize, I'm really sorry, because I will get things wrong, and around other people's lived experience that I haven't lived and don't fully understand. That willingness to learn, apologize, reevaluate, relearn, and therefore hopefully we won't do that bit again.
Yeah. Thank you.
Elizabeth.
Yeah, thank you very much for that train of thought, actually. But it's reminded me that when it comes to the issue of race, one of the frustrations, I think, of people of color has been that you will get asked really obvious questions, or you can get asked questions where you think that person has obviously not done the slightest bit of homework before asking me that question, or they haven't been bothered to think about maybe how they're approaching that question. So I've often heard colleagues, friends, and I've often read where people of color say, well, look, it's not my job. It's not my job to educate you. if you really want to find, sorry, if you really want information or you really want to know about this issue, come to me in a way that encourages me that you actually are interested and you're not asking a pro forma type question, which sounds a bit fake or sounds a bit like you think you ought to be saying something along those lines. So I think that, and Mel was, I think you expressed it very well, Mel. You don't want to give offense, but sometimes by not putting a bit of thought into what you're asking can give offense. I'd like to know what you think about that, Miia. And the others, everybody else too.
Yeah, just briefly, I mean, yeah, I think it's very true. These processes and conversations have
I
been
think
going
you're
on enough.
mute, Miia.
No, I can hear Miia.
Oh.
Can you hear me? Can
Yep.
you hear me? Elizabeth, can you hear me?
Oh,
Can you hear us, Elizabeth?
it's me.
Yeah. Can you hear me? Can you hear us, Elizabeth?
It might be that her earphones
Yeah.
have gone on strike. That sometimes happens to me. They sort of suddenly turn themselves off, maybe low battery. Yeah, coming back to maybe the computer. Can you hear us now, Elizabeth? Yeah,
Oh, good.
great.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think it's similar to me needing to go away and educate myself about ableism, you know, in relation to how I might guide mindfulness for people who have different bodies. You know, I get your point. It's not okay for me to just ask someone else to do all the work and tell me how, but I can go online. Nowadays, we can go online, we can listen to talks, we can read. So it's just that willingness to really try and be compassionate and empathetic and open our hearts to someone else's lived experience. And exactly the same in the issue of race, and it's been really on the forefront in the last year and a half. And we've had situations at work where, you know, people have been saying, yes, I'd really want our Black colleagues to tell me if I'm doing something wrong. And it's like, instead of just wanting them to do that and do the work, emotional labor of maybe pointing things out or educating, maybe it is that whole thing of really just seeing, could I maybe read that or that book or listen to a talk on what does it, you know, or around some of these issues, so that then I am maybe better informed. So I do support that stance, and we all have got lots to learn about other people's lived experience and lives, and not to get defensive, and in some ways not to ever think this is ever going to be over. We're always learning.
So Miia, sorry, it sounds then as though it's more about knowing the whole person, because that wheel that you showed, that, I mean, we're complex beings, aren't we? We've had so many different experiences. We've all got a different perspective on life. So it's about being curious about the person as a whole.
Yes, and caring and
absolutely,
and yeah, considerate as best we can. And Elizabeth, did if you asked me, did I sort of answer the right question, or?
Yeah, I agree with you. There has to be a kind of meeting of the way, you know, that it is for all of us. It's all our responsibility to have that holistic approach. Yeah, and there's so many facilities now available, as you mentioned, to go online, to listen to a talk, to buy a book, whatever, and then come back and show that you are actually interested. You're not asking for the sake of just asking, you know, because then that can be sort of a bit, you know, insulting as well. You know, it's like, who are you really doing it for? You really want to know? Yeah.
Yes, that can often be really felt, how, you know, open and genuine we are. So we have Carrie, and then Tessa, please.
Thank you. So I really appreciate this question, Elizabeth. And I mean, part of what it makes me think about is as someone who is trying not to be performative, and who is trying to build, continue to learn and study and be more aware, and also express genuine curiosity and appreciation for difference. It feels like there's a little bit of a fine line, or maybe a thick line, or I don't know what the line is, but there's a line between, like, I could spend the rest of my life unlearning what I've learned and learning, right? Like, there's history that I was never taught in school. There are cultural dimensions that, I mean, there's so much subtlety and nuance. And I mean, I could really invest all of my time, I feel like, in unlearning and relearning the right way to be. And so, but as part of, I think, sort of white supremacy perfectionism, as a number of us have alluded to, a big learning for me has been learning to show up in the moment and express honestly and curiously, and try to explore in conversation others' lived experience, and getting comfortable with just kind of sticking my foot in my mouth sometimes, not intentionally, certainly, but I struggle with saying the right thing or doing the right thing, and not from a performative perspective, but because of how it might land. So I wonder how anyone here might think about, like, what is sort of the balance between showing up with genuine curiosity and openness, while also knowing that, I mean, I can never know enough, in a way, if that makes sense. Like, I can never study enough, I can never learn enough. Is that making sense?
Yes, it does make sense. And I think maybe from my perspective, try to be brief this time to allow space for others, is that you kind of mentioned perfectionism, and maybe just that work of letting go of that, because we'll never know it all. Of course, we won't. So just letting go, doing the best we can, whilst bringing caring and compassion to our own capacity. And as best we can, from that compassionate place, remaining open. And we teach in the mindful self-compassion modality, the 3 elements are summarized as loving, connected, presence. Presence is the mindfulness part. The loving is the kind of part of compassion and caring, loving. And the middle part is common humanity. So if we can show up from loving, connected presence, and I've only read 1 paragraph about some particular aspect of someone's identity, or 10 books, it's like it's in that connection, that heart, that open heart, knowing both of us have a tender heart, and meeting there, from where maybe the learning happens best. And just dropping the perfectionism. Easier said than done.
And maybe also remembering, I think, thank you for that, Carrie. I really resonate with that, but also maybe remembering that we know a lot. Our sort of negativity bias, I think, likes to focus on what we haven't learned yet or don't know, and it will never be enough. So it's the focus on the lack. But, us being here and being interested and curious in a very important topic, I feel I don't know very much about. It took me some courage to ask, actually, Miia earlier, what is intersectionality? I do struggle with it. I think I get it, and now I have more understanding, and I'm happy. But I think maybe it's an encouragement I'm expressing here to all of us to also acknowledge what we do know and what we are interested in.
Yes. And Tessa, you had your hand up earlier.
Thank you, Miia. Yeah, it's been really fascinating conversation. I found that diagram of the different aspects of identity really useful, and I was just reflecting on that for myself. So as someone who's had severe depression in the past, and that was like the bit of me that I hid away, and I was mortified that anyone, you know, might find out and not be understanding about that. But I found it was so freeing to be able to then to be open about it, and that's what it's about, isn't it? We just want everyone to feel that freeing feeling of just to be who you are, like yeah. So I think that diagram's really useful. I love that. I guess I'm interested, Miia, what are some of the microaggressions that you experience that we might not even think that's not going to land well because of our ignorance?
Thank you, and thank you for sharing something obviously tender about yourself. It takes courage to share that. Well, I'd say one of the aggressions, and it can be at micro or macro, kind of not the intense level, is simply human insistence often that our gender identity exists on a binary, when we know that research, if we were open to looking at it, could enlighten us to say that's not the case, and that this sort of almost disrespect or disdain that one can feel if one doesn't sit in a binary, and or avoidance, and all of that's quite hurtful. And it can be also, we know at the extremes, it can be fatal in terms of aggression towards people, and or suicides that are very, very high in people with gender kind of diversity and transgender folk. So yeah, that's a big one from very personal experience. And I would say, again, with all of you being here, you're already showing very much the willingness to learn, willingness to be open. But one of the things would be just Google stuff. Google stuff. And you'll find gazillion books and YouTube videos where people are sharing of their lived experience. I'd rather not repeat other things that might have been difficult to receive. And I'm certainly not going to invite Elizabeth to do that from her experience either. So any other kind of, how long have we got, Teresa?
We've got until 6:30. So we've got another 10, 15 minutes. But I have a question about, following on from the conversation about being open, being freeing, being seen, being safe to be seen, and who we are. And I'm curious about your work in the financial district or in the city, because a lot of the big financial companies or corporations, they're very performance driven, and what we're talking about is changing leadership, or the idea of leadership, from being performance driven to that of one of being relationship driven or relational driven. And we're all here because we're curious, but we're a small handful of people. And of course, it has to start somewhere. Here's my negativity bias coming in. Of course, it's wonderful. We have to start somewhere. And it's also probably my impatience, but change isn't happening quick enough. It's about, you know, for example, with females in leadership positions, change isn't happening quick enough. I actually agree with the quota system. I think we have to have it, but that's something I'll share. But how has your work been with people in the city around this intersectionality and around being seen and being heard? If you don't mind sharing your experience.
Well, just a couple of experiences. One of the largest law firms in this country, for example, has given us a little bit of a donation, and also we ran a workshop where we looked at LGBTQ identities. Some of our Black minority ethnic colleagues ran a workshop for staff who wanted Black minority ethnic staff on. Again, these were kind of well-being focused, but within also people being within the identities that maybe they would feel more safe to share in that context about some of their challenges. And this is within a law firm. So we ran workshops and breakout rooms for different people within that massive corporation of a law firm. And also we had some other sessions, and one of them was for parents, you know, the juggling of this homeschooling and working and all the rest of it. Some colleagues who share some of that identity were running those sessions, and so on and so forth. And so I mean, we have experienced some openness. And also my last meeting before this was with a US corporation who within their social impact team are interested and have done a lot of work in all of their kind of policies and emphasis and how they want their work to support certain things like anti-racism or LGBTQ people to be kind of aligned with how they operate as a corporation. And so sometimes it's encouraging, it's incredibly encouraging. And we know, because we're in a city, that lots of firms have LGBTQ networks and other networks, and we are kind of making friends with some of those to have sessions like this. I've had also sessions like this with a couple of other corporations, another law firm that's smaller, but it was all on intersectionality, very similar conversations, very similar. I just talked a bit, showed that wheel, and off we go. Because I think this is a very human conversation.
Thank you. Gosh, I think everyone's digesting and thinking about the conversation.
May I ask others to share? I'd rather maybe not take any questions for the next 5 minutes. I'd like to just hear any thoughts you have, any reflections. Maybe it would be lovely to, even if you want to write the chat, a couple of words if you don't want to speak, or just say a few words and we go round the room before we close.
I have to go now. Thank you so much, Miia, and to everybody else as well. It's been a really helpful session.
Thank you, Karen. We'll see you again soon. Take care.
Bye.
I suppose one of the issues that we may not have touched on, I suppose in any great depth, is the intersectionality of class. And in many countries, and I'm sure Finland is probably seen as more or less a classless society, I'm assuming from what I've read and seen. But you know, in the UK, for example, it's very prevalent. I mean, we used to have, when I was growing up, it was sort of working class, middle class, and I suppose the aristocracy or whoever, the landed gentry. But but now there are about 7 or 8 different strands, you know, because people have become more socially and upwardly mobile and so on and so forth. So your education, your accent, or where you live and things like that come to the fore a lot more than perhaps they did previously, because people are looking to pigeonhole you. But what I've realized also is that as a Black person, a lot of people will assume that you are working class, or that you are poor, or that you're surrounded by gangs or whatever all the whole time. And this is where, personally, for me, it has been a bit sort of strange where people say, you live in Guildford, how did you get there? You live in Surrey, how come? You know, and it's almost genuinely like, oh, you should be in, I don't know, wherever, Newham, or I don't know. They think it's very strange for a Black person to live in a certain part of the country, a certain part of the city or town or whatever, or to even speak the way you speak. It's almost like you have to explain yourself now, that you have to justify, well, how come? What do you mean you used to live in Switzerland? Or how come you were ever in a boarding school? So it's like there's that classification of that, as if we're all homogenous, that we all come from a certain background or experience. And if you don't happen, for whatever reason, your parents, your upbringing, whatever, then it's like, now you have to explain to us how come that is the case. Which I don't know whether that would happen in Finland or perhaps some other countries which are more egalitarian, Nordic countries in particular. But yeah, maybe some of you may have some similar experiences. I don't know. There's regionalism as well in the UK. Obviously, there's you know, the famous Red Wall, and if you come from the northern part of the country, and but yeah, as a Black person, I found that is the main kind of is it macro aggression. People really want to know how come you don't have an East London accent or whatever it is they're expecting from me.
Yeah. Yes, and that's such a, and also thank you, Carrie, for lots of, and Tessa and anyone who put comments or questions in the chat as well. And yeah, that class is one assumed often, and especially in relation to, for example, race, and how painful that must be as well, to have to explain oneself and to be assumed to be a certain way. And often in these various initiatives, it's always the, oh, let's offer subsidized rates, as if everyone who has Black or brown skin hasn't got money, you know?
Yes, that's very true. And very
and that's just a very small part of an aspect of how we can work with this, with difference, and yeah. I'm aware, I said I would like to hear from everyone, so I'll be quiet for a while, even though there are some other questions in the chat.
Tessa, you raise an incredibly important point about really listening and hearing. And also, Elizabeth, to your point, is like, you know, it's not lip service about that curiosity, it's that authentic curiosity. So, you know, that I really want to hear about you, not like, oh, I think, you know, I've just got to ask because I'm supposed to do that, that's my job. It's like, I'm really interested in you, and I'm wondering if anyone has any experiences they'd like to share about how we can really take that to the workplace and listen.
I think for me, I think it was mentioned before or alluded to, but intention, it's always coming back to my intention for asking the question. Is it just a, you know, bit of curiosity, or just to fill the silence? You know, it might not even have bad intent, but no, just pause and think, why am I asking this question?
Yeah, it's interesting, Tessa, isn't it, Elizabeth, to your point, you know, people ask you, why, how come you live in Guildford? What's the intention? There's almost sounds like there's a judgment behind that, intention behind that question. There's an intention there. A friend of mine recently gave up alcohol. Her mother was an alcoholic that she shared with me, and she said it's the only thing you have to justify not doing when you go out. And she says, you know, you don't drink, why not? And you know, that's a very, very simple one of my experiences is, I mean, and even I wasn't like, why not? But I was curious, as because it's our culture, and in the UK or in England at least, to it's a very pub culture, and it's more usual to have a glass of wine than not to have a glass of wine. So it's but it's that curiosity as well. That is it, nosiness? Was it no? Was I being nosy? Probably, but there was no malice intended there. But I was curious to hear from her, but I didn't want to push her into an answer.
Yeah. Yeah, where you live or where you went to school, those are issues which are not necessarily seen as a personal choice, whereas drinking or not drinking,
sure,
is very individual.
Sure.
It's a very individual thing. Whereas I think some of the other issues I've mentioned, it's like it's your group doesn't live there. Your tribe, or why have you moved away from your people? Or why are you not? I'm assuming that that is what is going on in the back of the mind. But you know, it doesn't bother me. I think in the workplace, I think my experience, because I worked in an international organization for more than 25 years, I always had international colleagues speaking different languages, different religions. And then when I left that job, I realized that I'd been in a cocoon. I'd been very safe in that international environment because of people from literally all over the world. Every nation was practically represented there. And I thought, gosh, how safe it was, as opposed to coming out of that and then being part of like regular society. I mean, you spend most of your waking hours at work. And when you socialize, you're socializing with your workmates as well. So you're not really at the hard, what do you call it, that edge of interacting necessarily with the general population necessarily, not really. You think you are, but you're not.
Thank you.
So I had to relearn. There are lots of things that I had to relearn, that not everybody has traveled. Not everybody has had that experience of being exposed to different languages, different cultures, different foods, different. So I have to now relearn that actually you're dealing with people who are conservative with a small c, because they've lived in the same town since day one, where their grandparents were born, and they're, you know, so on and so forth. So I have to relearn. I have to think differently about the people I'm mixing with, because I'm coming out of a very exposed situation and dealing with people who might not be as exposed.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. I'm aware that we have 2 minutes left, and I've seen comments in the chat. And one of the questions I will just very briefly answer. Can you see this model again?
Yes.
Mel asked, what's the significance of the two sort of inner and outer ring? And the reason why I don't mention it is because I don't agree with it from where I inherited the model. I wish I could rewrite this, and I should, but I don't. I haven't bothered. But basically, whoever sort of introduced this, certainly in the context I learned it, said that some of the what's in the middle is more permanent characteristics or parts of our identity. Some of the outer are more changeable. But the middle, in my view, is also very changeable. We all, you know, to also allow them to be, rather than fix people into, label people into, that if you have at some point in your life, for example, had a certain gender identity or expression or sexual orientation, physical, mental ability constantly changing. With physical and mental ability both change with our age, our cognitive ability, our developmental ability, and so on, and our physical ability. So they change. So they're not that permanent in my view, hence I don't mention it. I think I would add health into the rings as well. And obviously it's linked to mental and physical ability, but to just make the point, as you raised, Tessa, about, you know, for example, health issues and how that can be part of our identity that we hide. Any concluding comments other than, for me, I would love to thank you all for being here. And I am actually also a bit uncomfortable with Luke not having had a chance to speak. I know Luke is supporting as a sort of tech person, but Luke, would you like to share anything?
You're on mute, Luke. Oh, we can't hear you. No, you're not on mute, but we can't hear you.
Luke didn't expect to be speaking.
No, I think, have you got your audio volume?
But we actually did hear Luke at the beginning, so something's just temporarily a hiccup. Feel free to also put your thoughts into the chat, Luke, if you can't get the audio to work.
I think Luke is typing. Thanks.
Thanks,
thank you, Luke.
everyone, for your comments in the chat and the book recommendation as well, Carrie. Cheers.
I would like to finish off by giving a link to Mia's to Rainbow Mind, and if anyone could kindly contribute to Rainbow Mind, I know that Miia would be very grateful. And I'll also put that on the when we send around an email to feedback, we'll put that donation link as well to carry on Mia's work. But from all of us, Miia, thank you for sharing such an incredible personal journey, and for trusting us with that journey. And I hope that I know we will all take such incredible learnings from tonight forward, and just a very, very big thank you.